All right, so here we have that same autobiographical memory function that I showed you earlier. And what we want to focus on right here is this part called the reminiscence bump. Um, so during this period of our lives, when we're between the ages of 10 and about 30, 25, something like that, we tend to remember more autobiographical facts than we do at other times of our lives. We tend to remember a lot of historical, at least seemingly historical events. Um, Look at that bump for recalling which team won the World Series. Um, Now it's only maxing out at 40%, so don't feel bad if you have no clue who ever wins the World Series, because I certainly couldn't tell you that either. But you see this bump for when people tend to remember that happens during that, 10 to 25 or 30-year-old phase. Who won the Academy Awards? You see that a similar bump happening. I noticed there's like this big drop between, in midlife, and I'm like, maybe that's because people are not going to the movies during that time because I couldn't name. Right now, I'm in that age bracket, and I can tell you I don't know anyone who's in the movies right now. I'm like, I don't know. Um, General semantic memories. There's like this increase during this period of time for remembering sort of just general, um, sort of meaningful things that are going on. Here's an example of one like current events. Um, they seem to peak around age 20. Your ability to recall things looking back, your most accurate time is when you're around age 20. You can remember more just general semantic things that are sort of out in the world memories. So there's something going on in that young adult, like late adolescence, young adult, kind of emerging adult phase, that makes things inherently more memorable. Maybe it's because there are a lot of life changes going on with us during that period of our lives as we're making transitions from high school and into, whatever we're doing afterwards. As we start to become autonomous adults and we suddenly become aware of a lot of these things that are going on. Um, a lot of times when you're a child, you're too busy. You're going to your sports and your clubs and your friend's house and all the things that you have to do. And then when you become an adult, you start to go, wait, I didn't know all this stuff happens in the world. I didn't know. I mean, these are things my parents were interested in. I had no idea were actually, going on, and I should care. So it might be a function of sort of maturation and, becoming in control of our own selves, or I'm not exactly sure, but suddenly things become more memorable than they had been before. Um, so some accounts for what happens with that reminiscence bumps. One the cognitive explanation is that maybe you're rehearsing it because suddenly this stuff becomes important. Like I said, you've made all these transitions in your life and suddenly you're autonomous and you're like, maybe I should start paying attention to what's going on around me. And you're thinking about things more. Maybe it's because this is the first time you're really thinking about or noticing these things. They're very distinct. They're very distinctive. You're like, wow, this is the first time I've ever seen this. Even though it's not the first time it's ever happened, it's just you've never been aware of it before. So for you, this is a distinctive thing. This is something meaningful, something that needs to be stored. The identity explanation says, like I was saying earlier, that you're growing and developing and becoming a full-fledged adult, and the things that are going on around you get internalized as part of your identity. And so, those current events that were going on as you gained, maturation, you're going to be like, oh, that's part of me. Whichever movies were popular at the time, whichever sporting team was important at the time, those are part of your sense of self. And so it's part of that self schema, these details, right? And because they're tied to you and your sense of fully autonomous adult now, it makes them distinctive, right? And memorable. It could be because during that period of time we're experiencing our peak functioning. Our cognitive abilities are at their peak during that time. Our brain is functioning at its optimal level during that time. And so maybe it's just easier for us to remember things, even incidental things that don't really matter. Maybe they're just easier to remember. And so peak brain functioning might be an explanation for why we get that reminiscence bump. It could be some combination of the three. You could blend these all together, and next thing you know, you're like, yeah, how would you not remember all those things that are not that meaningful when you were younger and not that meaningful when you get older, but it's like all the perfect confluence for it to be like, wow, this stuff's memorable when you're, between 20 and 25 years old. All right, so what about the fact that we do a lot of forgetting of things in our older years? Um, you know, if you don't think about something, it's going to be really hard, even if you've got it stored in your brain, for you to find it. I mean, if you don't rehearse, if you don't think about it, if you don't retrieve it, it becomes harder and harder to retrieve, even if it is still stored in your brain. It could be, interference from other things. Maybe the thing that you're trying to retrieve isn't distinctive enough. Maybe as information transitions from memory to fact and loses its emotional component and that sort of thing, you lose one of the avenues for finding the information. Maybe that emotional component had been important for retrieving the memories. And as you lose that, you're moving from memory to fact and you lose the emotional component, it literally becomes harder to find the information. It interferes with your ability to retrieve. So it could be that as we get older, we're having, more forgetting due to these basic, memory functions. Now, we do see some cultural differences in forgetting. Um, so, in individualistic cultures versus collectivistic cultures, in individualistic cultures, we tend to remember specific episodes of things that happen in our lives. We have, very specific autobiographical memories. And the explanation for that is, we have this focus on autonomy, and we rehearse details of events when they're focused on us, right? If it relates to us and it's meaningful to us, then we're more likely to rehearse that information, deeply process it, and so on. Um, Another aspect is that, we engage in more analytic processing when we're focused on individual events, right? So we really think about the event, we think about what it means, we think about whether it's likely to happen again, we think about how it relates to other things that have happened to us. This kind of analytic processing ties our individual events to a wider net that is going to make it more memorable in the long run. In collectivistic cultures, what we see as the most common memory is generic memories. Like if you think about the Taiwanese example, it was generic memories. It wasn't about something like tying your shoes or getting a gold star. It was about a generic comparison with their girl cousin and the general family attitude about whoever the speaker was, and then their girl cousin. Um, in collectivistic cultures, when they generate autobiographical information, it tends to come forth more as facts than as memories. So that means less emotional valence, things like that. The explanation for that is because they're focused on relationships, they tend to rehearse things that are more generic and apply to more people and less idiosyncratic and focused on themselves. So, what you pay attention to becomes the thing that you can remember better, right? Um, People from collectivistic cultures tend to do more holistic processing, focusing on similarities. This Taiwanese story comparing the speaker to their cousin, they were saying, sorry, that they were always being compared to their cousin. It did sound like they were coming out ahead in the comparison. The speaker was the more sensible one, but this kind of holistic processing, how am I like my cousin? How am I not like my cousin? How am I like the people that are valued, and how am I unlike those people? Those kinds of things, right? So they look for similarities. Um, when there's any, see, and I just do that sort of from a Western perspective too, because I said I was focusing on the me versus my cousin kind of thing, and it's much more holistic than that in the assessment. It's not really about the individual; it's about how the group is fitting together, right? When thinking about autobiographical experiences, the relationships among the events would be the important thing. Like, what is this teaching me? How is this preparing me to do a better job in my roles in life? Those kinds of things, rather than so that I can tell this story to somebody so that they'll understand me and know me as an individual, which is what individualistic culture emphasizes. So different goals for why a memory would be retained, and then also different contents of what would be retained in a memory. All right, let's talk a little bit more about when we forget. So the encoding view says we call it forgetting, but most of the time, according to this view, probably 90% of the time, it's not that we forgot the content, it's that we never encoded the content. According to the encoding view, if it was encoded, you're not going to lose it. If you encoded it and you went through long-term potentiation and made new synapses to represent this memory, you're not going to lose that content. The rehearsal view, on the other hand, says you may have encoded it initially and maybe had access to it for some period of time following that initial encoding, but if you stop using that information, you will in fact lose that information. It can go away. So we have very different approaches to what happens to an encoded memory according to the encoding view versus the rehearsal view. Encoding view says, hey, if you got it in there, it's there. You just can't find it. The rehearsal view says, hey, if you haven't used it, it may not be there anymore. You may have missed your chance. It may be gone now. So when we go to retrieve autobiographical memories, if we keep those two models in mind as we go through this, language is going to serve as one cue for autobiographical memory retrieval. Here we have bilinguals, and the number of memories that are recalled is on the y-axis, and then we've got the interview language on the left part of the x-axis, and then the cue word language, and then we have a match happening in the gray bars and a mismatch in the languages in the blue bars. And so if I interview you in the same language as you encoded the word, you're going to remember more words. If we give you a cue word that's in the same language as you use to encode the words or the memories, you're going to remember more. If there's a mismatch, it's just like the encoding specificity that we talked about in the last chapter. Whenever there's a mismatch, you're going to see detriment, right? You're not going to remember as much. So language can serve as a cue. And so any of you who are listening, who are bilingual, if you're struggling to listen to my lectures or read the book in English because it's not your first language, it's important to do it because the tests are in English, right? So it's important to have that match. You're going to be harmed more if you rehearse in your native language and then go take an exam in English. You know what I mean? Because then you've got a mismatch between the material that the context that you encoded it and then what you're retrieving it in. Now that's true for autobiographical memories as well, obviously. So if you were, let's say, some of you who are bilingual might relate to this story. Perhaps you were born and lived for some number of years in a culture in a country that spoke a particular language, and then you moved. Those early memories, having been formed in the language that was present at the time, that language is serving as a cue for those memories, so that now if you're in another country where you're speaking predominantly another language, you may find that those memories are somewhat inaccessible, or you don't remember as many details of it. And then if you just speak to somebody who also speaks that original language and you can talk to them in that language, it may free up some of those memories, right? Suddenly you're remembering more details because the language that you use to encode it is going to lead to better recall later. If you have a mismatch, you're probably going to lose some details. The explanation for this is that it puts you back in the same mindset that you were in when you encoded the material, and so you're going to be thinking in the same way that you were more closely when you formed the memories, and so that's going to be a benefit. So we want to make sure, for testing purposes, for certain, that you would use the same language at retrieval as you used for encoding. So whenever you have control over that situation, it's in your best interest to, encode in the same language that you're going to be retrieving. Your current mindset can affect retrieval of information. So here's an example from a study where there was a neutral cue word on the laptop in the middle there. So just neutral little words, and the participants are seeing these neutral words on the laptop while they're moving these balls from the lower tray to the upper tray. That led to recollection of more positive memories, autobiographical memories. So a neutral cue word leads them to think of an autobiographical memory, and as they're telling the memory, they're moving these marbles up to the level above, and that seems to have like evoked a positive mindset where they're like, I'm climbing upward, I'm improving, I'm going higher. And that led them to recall more positive memories than if they were doing the reverse, where they were moving the balls downward while they were retrieving their autobiographical memories. They remembered more negative memories as they were moving downwards, as if they were regressing or doing worse or returning to where they came from, kind of like this negative, more negative memories. So the current mindset that you're in, am I growing and developing and reaching and climbing, or am I regressing and going backwards and going down, can affect what kinds of memories you retrieve. Odors. I mentioned this before, that odor can be a really powerful cue for retrieval. It's called the Proust phenomenon. It's anecdotal. They've had a lot of difficulty trying to test this hypothesis because what's weird, the problem with this is that for each of us, different odors are the key, right? And if you asked me what odor has a really powerful effect for me, I can't even tell you exactly what it is. It I don't even know what it is, honestly. And so, how could I even tell the researchers what I need them to get so that I can sniff it and remember something, right? I mean, that's the problem. You smell it and then it just automatically does the thing, right? And all of a sudden, these memories come back. The memories that are retrieved in this fashion tend to be described as vivid, like, but I don't know if vivid is the right word, because it to me, vivid implies that there would be a lot of detail, but it's not necessarily that there are a lot of details that are evoked by odors. I think maybe instead of vivid, it should be described as maybe intense. It's emotional, I should say. You may not even remember what you're remembering, but you know what it's making you feel like. That's what odors can do. Modern research has been suggesting that maybe the proximity of the olfactory bulb, which is what you use to smell, so it's over here right on the top side of your sinus cavity, it's connected very closely to the hippocampus and the amygdala. So emotions and memory formation, right? And so it's possible that the olfactory bulb is very closely connected to the really powerful emotion generators and memory storage areas, and maybe you don't even remember what it is that you had been storing when you smelled that smell, but it brings back that general sense. Now, the best verbal cues for eliciting memories are the classic newspaper ones. Like a newspaper reporter is supposed to ask who, what, where, when. Those are the best verbal cues for eliciting the best autobiographical memories. They really do cause a person to start thinking about, what happened, where was I, who was I with, when did this happen, and you get more details when you ask those kinds of questions. So we've talked a number of times about this self-memory system, this system that is so powerful. And, we see evidence for it in the self-reference effect and, these kinds of things that we've talked about throughout the class. We have this working sense of self where we've got our self-image, our goals and our plans, all of our attitudes and our beliefs. These are all part of our working self, like our sense of who we are. And then we have our autobiographical knowledge base, which contains, different periods of our lifetime, in probably stored in some kind of coherent way. General events that happen that we remember having happened. May not have been personally didn't personally happen to us, but it was something that was going on at a critical point in our lives, and so we remember those events. And then complex episodic memories of things that happened in our lives, and we remember the details and we can tell the story, and all of these things that help to fuel our sense of self, right? Like how I reacted to riding on that wooden roller coaster that time I was at the amusement park. That's going to feed into things like, my attitudes and my self-image and all of those kinds of things. Um, all right, let's go ahead and take a break here. Yeah, let's do that, and then we'll do flashbulb memory as our final segment.